Welcome back to our podcast, Talkin Design Down Under. I'm your host, Keith D. Franks III with the Australian Tabletop Gaming Network. And with me is multi-award winning special guest, Steve Dee. Say hi, Steve.
Hello.
So, starting off, I'd like to do a little bit of how did you get here? So, what inspired your interest in board games?
I've been a board game nut almost as long as I can remember. I think you could probably pin it back to getting a copy of Mousetrap when I was about 6 or 7.
Wow.
The game with the you knock the marble down the stairs and it hits the
Rube Goldberg machine with dice.
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty silly game, but it is a lot of fun to build it and then watch it go. And yeah, games from my parents for Christmases and birthdays, and then just been playing them my whole life and making a bunch of them along the way. We were often we weren't homeless or anything, but we were a fairly poor family, so I just had to improvise and made my own game, out of cardboard and pens and whatever I could scrounge up. So sounds funny, when True of a Suit came out, it was originally a high-end item relatively. It was like $50 or something for the core set. So I built my own and tried to just, every time I saw a trivia question on anything, I would just put it in a box. They used to be on the lids of bottles and back of matchboxes and things like that. So I just threw all those into a box and tried to make my own version of True of a Suit, which was good fun.
Okay.
That was, back in the 80s.
Way back when, before me, entirely.
Yeah.
So what was your transition from tinkering to properly being in the tabletop industry?
When I was at university, I started working on my own little fanzine, I guess it was, but it was the internet was kicking off then, so we made our own webpage. It still had a magazine kind of format. We were updating every couple of months. We originally tried to do 2 monthly, but we just couldn't keep it up. And at that point, I was also started writing my own articles for that, and I also submitted some of them to some magazines and got those published. Okay. And it was. And then I started sort of submitting things to other companies. I think my first job ever was for a game called Star Children, which was relaunched on Kickstarter last year, I think.
Wow,
the original edition of that was 2002.
Okay.
And I did some work on a supplement for that. And that was sort of, again, through a friend. And yeah, it just sort of, and the thing is, it was kind of, it's a little bit porous, particularly in the RPG industry, because you tend to be writing things as if you're a GM. And I was writing articles for my zine, and I was writing sending in articles to magazines, and I was working on stuff on a website. Like I was designing lots of extra stuff for games that I liked. And then sort of slowly around there, finally I got my first really big official job was for Warhammer in 2006.
Oh yeah.
So the Skaven book that they did for the second edition, that was my first sort of here, we need you to write 40,000 words.
Okay.
Jump in first. And so that was, so basically 15 years of being a full professional, I guess. But as I say, it's a drifting thing where you take a while before where you're slipping between hobby and professional.
Of course.
Which is the same. Yeah.
Of course. So how do you transition from a hobby designer to being somebody like multi-award winning Steve Dee? I
mean, for me, the process was simply that I really, really wanted to get into the publishing. And so with role-playing, a lot of it was making myself valuable to other people. I did a lot of reviews as well. I missed that one out.
Okay.
So that actually got me noticed by a lot of companies. If they, because they put out a game and then I would have within a week, a fairly flattering and extremely detailed review on a popular website, and I would talk about it and stuff. So that helped get me attention. And then I heard when the new Warhammer was out, a friend of mine was already in the industry, and they were doing an open call for talent to help get more people working for them. I submitted. I actually am old enough that before that, I actually applied for some role-playing jobs through the mail.
Wow.
That was email was there, but they also kind of wanted, they just for their records, they were still on paper. So it's like, send us your writing samples by mail. That was when I was hoping to work on the Farscape game. So a lot of it is just, you listen, you wait for there to be open calls, and even if there isn't, they're often like, you can send us submissions. You get a writing sample, you get a bit of a resume, if you have one, and you send it off. And again, the nice thing about the role-playing industry is that if you've already been a GM and stuff, you've often got the skills, and they're always looking for people because there's a lot of work to be done, and unfortunately it doesn't pay very well. So
that's true.
That is another reason that keeps bringing new people in, because after a while you're just like, well, I have to go and do things that pay a little bit more money.
Yeah, so when you're not submitting to 100 different things, there's always the self-publish route that I believe you've done recently with Relics on Kickstarter. Tell me a little bit about how that came together.
Yeah, so I was never particularly keen on self-publishing. I was always just rather being a freelancer, but it was also, one reason for that is it's very difficult to do it in Australia. It certainly was 10 years ago. But then along came Kickstarter, and along came a community with that was making games in Australia again, and on a much larger scale. I went to PAX in, I think, 2016, and was like, okay, there's a community, there's printers, there's a bit more of an infrastructure, and I can see how Kickstarter's working. So I thought maybe it's time to make my own game, and just I'd already made a few smaller games, purely PDFs, and put a few of those up on drive-through. So I'd sort of done that a little bit, and I thought, no, okay, maybe I can make a much larger game. And it's certainly been a long process and a learning process, but it was just the idea that it seemed something that was a lot more possible and a lot more worthwhile with the reach of the internet and things like that.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I'm a big fan of Kickstarter myself. But I'm interested, talk to me how you came to design Relics. As a theme, it's something Christianity, I don't know if it's specifically Christianity, but that's the take I get from when I look at it, is definitely something that is very well represented in comics a lot and a lot of other media. How did it come to building a role-playing game around that kind of well-known, established mythos, really?
I think I've always just been fascinated by angels. They tend to... There's not actually... there's sort of a lot of stories about them, but they often get a bit forgotten in the Monster of the Week, where it's vampires and werewolves and things like that. But I find them a lot more fascinating. I mean, probably that started with when I was a kid. There used to be a show called Highway to Heaven, which is a very sort of saccharine Christian show about a mysterious angel figure who went by the name Jonathan Smith. The mythos of the angel, of sort of this stranger who walks the earth but doesn't belong to it, was always something that attracted me. And so, yeah, I was like, that was sort of one of the first settings that I began fleshing out in my head. It was like, if I ever did a role-playing game, probably started back in, maybe 15 years ago, that I first sort of having the idea of turning that into a setting. And yeah, it was, a lot of it was inspired, in part by the White Wolf games. They did eventually do Demon the Fallen, but I didn't always like their take on it, and I already had some of my own ideas. But that sort of idea of a book about a certain kind of supernatural creature as the centerpiece, but the one that I was more interested in rather than vampires and werewolves.
Okay, that's pretty interesting, because there's plenty of vampire content, there's plenty of werewolf content, and more recently there's plenty of stuff like Cthulhu and that going around. So it's interesting to bring back something that's way old and be able to make it fresh and new and interesting again. Yeah. Which has definitely been something cool to have a look at going through the campaign material.
Yeah, a lot of people have very fond memories of a game called In Nomine, but it came out in 998 or 999, I think.
Wow.
And it was a very, very cool and interesting game about angels and demons. And every time I talked about Relics, everyone said, oh yes, we love that. And I loved it too, But then I go, do you know, it's been over 20 years since that game came out. We should have another one.
It's about time.
We were really lucky because we actually, I went to one of the great artists for In Nomine, Dan Smith, and I said, can you be our artist? And we were able to secure him as well. So it is in kind of that way as well, a sequel to In Nomine, or
spiritual successor.
Spiritual successor, that is exactly what
it's the term I hear a lot about old stuff. Yeah, it sounds apt too.
Yeah. And there was, as I say, there was Demon the Fallen as well, but it hasn't really been touched on that much. But as soon as you start talking to people about it, people have a strong connection to this idea. And I think in the last couple of years, there's been a real rise of it in TV and videos, comics and movies and things. It's popping up a lot more on Netflix and things like that. A show called Warrior Nun just started.
Yes, it did. It's number 2 in Australia, or number 1 in Australia right now on their list. Yeah, my introduction to that kind of genre was Constantine with Keanu Reeves. And even though I went to a Catholic high school, Constantine was the first time I ever thought Christianity could be any kind of cool. Which is odd, you know.
Yeah, I mean that was it's a pretty good film, and comics were also a big influence on me. We actually go through Constantine in the rulebook as an example of how to tell a kind of story that we're working with in Relics, especially not just the elements, but also the structure of that story and how we've used that in the mechanics. But yeah, Constantine was a good example of what you can do in this realm. Yeah, they're even talking about bringing him back or something, possibly.
Yeah, it had a series briefly.
There was the TV series, yes, with an actual British person.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I've heard much beyond that. I would love to see Keanu Reeves come back and do more of that.
Yeah.
But while we're on that topic, if you could have access to any movie's intellectual property to be able to make your board game adaptation, what would it be? If you say Constantine, I'll be upset.
I mean, yeah, it's like if we could just stamp Constantine on the front of Relics, then, you know, we'd probably get a lot of sales. It's a good question. Let me think.
Well, while you're thinking, I'll give one. So in the last episode, I talked about how I wanted to make The Quiet Place one, because I literally walked out of that movie saying, hey, I want to make this board game. But I feel like giving the same answer for every episode is a bit cheap. So this time I'm going to say all-time favorite Godzilla would be amazing to make some kind of Kartoffelkrieg mech fighting Godzilla versus King Kong board game.
Yeah,
if you're an exec for Godzilla versus King Kong, hit me up. I will smash that out and it will be spectacular.
That's a good answer. And the way that they've developed the sort of universe recently of the cinematic thing, that's been really good.
I am living for it. Living for it. It's literally every single movie they announce in that series from Legendary is in my calendar. They've got a trailer coming out and the trailer release date is in my calendar. That's how excited I am for it.
Fantastic. Yeah, no, I love Godzilla and I would be great to work on something like that. And also on that subject, Pacific Rim. That would be an amazing setting to develop. And,
definitely.
Write more stuff about. I'm actually playing the board game Twilight Imperium at the moment, and it's got an incredible backstory that was once turned into a terrible role-playing game and could really use another one. And on a similar sort of thing, I'd love to work on a Jupiter Ascending RPG.
Oh man, that movie was really good and really hated for some reason.
Yeah, I don't know why. It is beautiful and it's got an incredible setting just waiting to be developed into
100%
comics and everything. And yeah, so that would be one that if those executives are out there and listening, you know,
we should just make podcasts for executives.
The Wachowski sisters are listening, then I'm the one to call, and I'll do your Jupiter Ascending game. Absolutely.
I'd be itching to collaborate on that too. I'm definitely with you on that one.
Fantastic.
All right, so what's next is usually we talk a bit about what you're working on, but because we've already touched a bit on Relics, I want to talk a bit about the journey on how you got there. So I'm actually pretty familiar with a few other games that you've come up with. My favorite probably being There's Been a Murder.
Yep.
Recently I discovered your Tilda Swinton game. I can't remember what you've called it.
Sorry, which game?
The business card one with I'm not your friend, I am actor Tilda Swinton.
Yes, I don't think it really has a name. I guess it's called I Am Tilda Swinton.
Yeah. Let's start with that one. What inspired you to make a business card game that turns any wielder of it into an actor?
I think I was just goofing around, and that's often how you get good ideas. We were talking about somewhere we were just talking about how great actors. There's a meme where you find out that your whole life you're Gary Oldman.
Yeah.
I was sort of thinking about that, like
Yeah.
what if it was the other way around and that you didn't find out, but you just found out someone else in your life was like, oh, you're all, I thought you were my friend, but you're actually just Tilda Swinton, and she's such a great actress.
That's hilarious.
And then I was like, you know what, that would be a fun thing to put on a card, and I needed a new business card. And it's always good to have something really memorable and different on a business card.
Conversation starting, exactly.
Yeah.
So if somebody talks about something, that creates a type of memory rather than, Steve Dee, this is a business card. And I think that in itself is already a fantastic idea. And then introducing something that goes, hey, I'm Steve Dee. No, actually, I was Tilda Swinton all along. In itself is conceptually hilarious.
I have made a lot of small games. I mean, that's one of the ways that I promoted Relics, was just making small games that I could fit on a postcard, and then I just gave them out to everybody for free, because that was something that I could do relatively cheaply. I couldn't pay for like an ad in a magazine, but I could wander around a convention and give everyone a free game. And then again, the idea is that they look at it for more than just it's an ad, as you say.
That's it.
And that was a big part of how I just promoted everything that I've done. I'm just giving people out small games, and some of them have been really well received and gone around the internet and things like that. And some have even been nominated for awards, even though they're just small games that fit in a business card or in a tweet even.
Okay, so my favorite one of these that you've done is Elon Musk's iPod submarine.
Yep.
Which at the time he was, I believe it was the cave-in, or there was people trapped in the thing, and he showed up to rescue them, and he was in the focus of the media right at the time. And then immediately afterwards, I see that you've created a board game running onto the back of that. Now, and I imagine it blew up as well. It got taken around Twitter a few times, and Reddit and whatnot. Yeah. So how do you?
It was retweeted, I think, over 1,500 times, which is not huge, but it definitely blew up my ego. Yeah,
it's a lot.
Yep. Yeah. So sometimes that's just how my brain works. Like, I see something and I want to comment on it instead of writing a blog or a comic or something. I'm just like, you know what? That would be a funny idea for a game, because I just imagined, how the sort of bad brainstorming. So yeah, like Elon Musk is one of those guys who just comes up with the worst possible solution to something.
He still does.
There were experts on the ground who had this idea that the diving experts had this incredible. They were doing all the work. They were the absolute experts. And Elon Musk kind of burst through on Twitter and going, I'm building a miniature submarine, and it's going to be super comfy. There'll be leather seats, and then I'm going to put iPods in every seat so you can listen to music while you're being rescued. And everyone's like, what the hell are you talking about? And the other part of that idea, there was a game that we've been playing with some friends of mine that was based on Spyfall of sorts. So Spyfall has that thing where one of you doesn't know what everyone else is talking about, and everyone else is trying to not give it away, but also not be seen as the one who doesn't know. So you have to sort of pretend without letting on. And my friends sort of developed that into a thing where they were being not spies, but philosophers. So they were sort of talking about things in a weird, abstract way, and so that was in my head, and I was kicking around what other genres that would work in. And so it just was like, how would I make a game about this? And it just kind of popped into my head, as sometimes it does. And because I'd made a few other games on a postcard, I thought, right, I'll just make up a little image, throw it online. The right person happened to tweet it at the right time. And it still goes around every now and then, gets a retweet, and the Reddit thread gets a like or something. So
it's a big bump or something,
people. I mean, the thing is that Elon Musk keeps insisting on playing the game. He keeps crashing in and going, you know what, we need a Cybertruck.
Yeah, I know. His shoes?
We need Kanye to block the president.
The flamethrower? I know, this guy's insane.
Yeah.
He in himself is the biggest advertiser of your game, because every time he does something aloof, I'm like, man, remember that time when Steve Dee was right on the money?
Yeah. And that was sort of an interesting thing. Like, I wonder if some people who were like, who would have thought Elon Musk was a really smart, important person, have played my game and looked at my game and then had another look at Elon and changed their mind. And that's that's really interesting to me that a game can have that sort of effect.
Yeah.
On changing people's positions and changing the cultural position of someone in your mind. I would love for it to go further as well, to sort of, capture people's imagination. Since he's still around, so if anyone's listening to this, you can find it on my website. Which
Elon Musk, if you're listening to this.
Yeah, we'll do a deal where you can come along and you can put out an official version.
Comes with a pair of cyber shoes or whatever. Flamethrower add-on.
Yeah, and a flamethrower.
Kickstarter stretch goal flamethrowers.
Fantastic.
All right, so then after that, I believe we had There's Been a Murder.
Yep.
Which is definitely, it still is one of my favorite social deduction games, because the best thing about the social deduction genre is the further away you get from it, the more people have fun, which is really strange and is really exciting. Now, what I really like about There's Been a Murder is inherently you are facing the clock of the deck, and as it winds down, you are trying to discover the murderer before you run out of resources and you run out of time. Now, I'd love to learn a little bit about how you came to that kind of mechanical conclusion when building a murder mystery game.
I think the first thing I wanted to do was the challenge was to do an 18 card game, which I'd never done before. And the first thing I wanted to do was to make it cooperative. Because I really like cooperative games. They tend to be my favorite genre. Pandemic and Spirit Island and things like this are my big favorites. So that was my first challenge. It was what would I... And this was a thing where the mechanics kind of led the theme, because my first thing was what are the kind of things that you can do with cards? If you look at Love Letter, you can look at other people's cards, you can move cards around, you can draw some cards from the deck. Basically, you're trying to figure out who has what card. So then I thought to myself, okay, so what's a situation where there's a group of people trying to figure out, who's who? And I went, that's a murder mystery. I have a great love of the sort of the Agatha Christie books and all the cliches that come with them. So I was just like, you know what, this is just going to work really well. The ideas just sort of came really quickly from that, because you can just go around the archetypes of all the people in those stories that tend to follow very clear patterns. I was able to get a card list really quickly. It took a lot of little tricks to get it to work well, but then it came together really well, and I'm very proud of it, because I didn't think I could make an 18 card game. It seemed impossible, and sometimes it just that's the thing. If you think something is impossible, and you have a think about it, have a crack, because you might reveal that you have a skill you never knew.
Yeah, and it's definitely rewarding to have that accomplishment after stepping outside your comfort zone, for sure. Yeah. Having this long history of mostly written style games to come across into a more tactile space as a small card game. It's definitely interesting to see how that... And it feels like there's a big storyteller element in that same design space as well. I do like to make my games have a lot of meaning. I don't play a lot of abstract games, so I want people to engage with a story and with a sense of evolving story, like the idea where you have not so much it's like time stories or something where there's a story in the thing, but the story that emerges when strange things interact with each other. That's really fun for me, when this card's over there, and that when you're playing the game of life and all of a sudden you have 12 children, and then you decide to buy an art museum, and what the hell am I doing? That kind of random thing that games throw out, I think, is one of the real great enjoyments I get out of games. So everything has to everything. I like everything to have a meaning and a sense of what they do, and so that also helps people learn the game as well, because for example, in There's Been a Murder, there's a character called the Drunk, and they're allowed, normally you have to be silent, but the drunk is allowed to talk loudly, and everyone gets that instantly, because they understand that there's always someone at the party who's a drunk and doesn't know that they're supposed to keep their mouth shut. Awkwardly defying social rules.
Exactly. So it instantly communicates what that card does, which is what you want. That's what theme is really about. People think theme is not always important, but the key thing of theme is actually to communicate what the rules do and how to play the game.
Yeah, it's kind of like a shorthand that builds into your existing skills and existing knowledge in a category. So,
That's
for example,
right.
if you're making a game about bees, then you would be expecting to find stuff like honeycomb, stuff like the hierarchy of the bee, where you have the queen, the workers, and so on. And all of these existing things is kind of like a collective knowledge about a topic, and rather than having to say, hey, there's this really weird alien that lives in a cone, and explain something entirely new to someone, you can rely on an existing concept in order to sell that. And I think Relics does that really, really well, because it uses a very well-known phenomenon as the Christian mythos and says, these are the precepts in that, and this is how you are going to interact with this universe with all these concepts that you're already familiar with.
Yeah. And that's really why stories that involve Christian mythology and Christian horror can be so much more effective, because you can walk down the street and pass 5 churches and you see the crosses and the angels everywhere you go. That's one of the reasons why the Doctor Who story Blink is so effective, not just because it's really well written with the time travel, but it's about angel statues that you suddenly realize you see everywhere. And that sense of pervasion it gives you this storytelling an edge that nothing else can provide.
Yeah, exactly. All right, we are running out of time here. So, Steve, can you quickly run me through some places where we can find your content?
Yep, so you can pretty much everywhere. I'm Tin Star Games, so tinstargames.com, so tin like the metal, tin star like the sheriff games.com is where you can find all my games, including all the free ones like Elon Musk's iPod Submarine. They're all on there. You can also find me on Twitter at @TinstarGames, Facebook at @TinstarGames, and on Instagram at @TinstarGames. So, and you'll also be able to play There's Been a Murder at ConCon, which is coming up next weekend, if I'm right, a week, like 8 days from now.
No, later on in the month, I believe.
Oh, I'm 1 week out, I think.
Yeah. Late July,
The 25th.
which is something I'm working on as well. I'm also showing off a game at ConCon, Spaceship Redoubt. So that's definitely going to be an exciting event to have a look at. It's late July. Make sure you check that out. Make sure you check out Steve on Twitter. Go and retweet iPod Submarine so it can blow up again, and Steve can make lots of money from everyone getting in his DMs. And thanks for coming and having a chat, Steve.
No worries. Anytime.